I said, I don't use that word because you didn't miscarry anything. And one of my students started sobbing. She's like, I have had pregnancy losses and no one has ever said that to me. And you just like reframed my entire experience.
Welcome to the Kindness Is podcast, where we take a deep dive into the true meaning of kindness. I'm your host, Caitlin Johnstone, the co-founder of Kind Cotton. Let's dive in. Wake up. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kindness Is pod. I am very excited today because I am speaking with a woman who I needed in my life when I was going through perinatal phases. Meg Duke is a seasoned, licensed clinical social worker supervisor and proud owner of Amplify Wellness Mental Health and Coaching. With a profound focus on perinatal mental health, Meg specializes in addressing distractibility, focus issues, and enhancing attention during the crucial perinatal period. She brings a unique blend of compassion, clinical knowledge, and a commitment to mental well-being. We dance all over all types of topics throughout this episode, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. Meg is such a wealth of knowledge, and I am so grateful to have been able to spend some time with her on and off the podcast.
My face is actually hurting right now from smiling so much. Like, I'm so happy to be here. I just realized, I'm like, oh my gosh.
That makes me so happy. And for anyone who is listening, I feel like we just need to tell listeners, like, the craziness. First of all, Meg had me on her podcast, which is incredible. You need to go listen to it sometime. But, and I'll link it all in the show notes. So she had me on her podcast, it was like 2 weeks ago now.
Yes.
And I had a brand new puppy. The puppy was going crazy. I thought it was going to like nap right here at my feet. And she was going nuts. And Meg was so amazing. Oh. So today I had everything planned. Everything was ready. My daughter was going to be at school. My husband was going to have the dog. Well, my daughter's teacher got sick. My husband had a call at the same time. The dog got into the front yard, and here comes the puppy and my mom running down the stairs as Meg and I were about to start this podcast.
Yes.
So here we are, friend.
But if that is not just a metaphor for parenthood, honestly, for life, like anybody who's listening who does not have tiny humans for whom they're responsible, for life. I mean, we really have these best, and not to be pessimistic, but just like the best laid plans, and we can be as prepared as we can be. And you were so you told me all of those things. And then it's just like, and everything that was outside of your control came to be.
Yeah. All at once. So I feel like this is somehow an odd but beautiful introduction as to who you are and what you do, because you help a lot of parents in your line of work, right?
Yes. That is I do see people who are emphatically child-free. I do see a little younger people. I see some older people, but generally speaking, I focus on perinatal mental health and more specifically perinatal focus. ADHD is obviously a proper diagnosis, and we don't want to overdiagnose ourselves or anybody else, but a lot of people with the distractibility and the focus concerns. And so, yes, these are the conversations that I have with people so often. And like, how do we sit with the emotion that's related to it? How do we try to plan for it, but give ourselves grace when it all falls apart and everything in between?
I mean, I feel like I need to just sit in here on a session with you right now because this is my life. Like, you are talking to me. Why did you decide to specifically focus on perinatal mental health? Like, why was that such a passion of yours?
So when I decided to go full-time private practice, they always tell you too, because they don't teach us marketing in social work school. They always tell you really got a niche. If you are and I use air quotes, expert, or like that's the one thing that you do, like what is your one thing, then people are going to be able to find you more. They're going to want to come talk to you. And so for me, and of course you can really niche down within perinatal mental health as well. And for me, so I had my own fertility struggles. We decided that we were going to start trying at a certain time, like a month and a half in, I got pregnant. I had a positive pregnancy test. And, I think it was about 8 weeks in, I had my first pregnancy loss. And then I didn't get pregnant for a really long time. Then I got pregnant again and had another pregnancy loss at 7 weeks. have lots of stories about all of that and how not great some care providers are. Just because somebody participates in maternal fetal medicine or obstetrics or anything related to lactation, nursing, there are some beautiful providers out there who have nothing but the highest of intelligence and the best of hearts and know exactly what to say all the time. People will say terrible things to you, and it's tough because you see them as a professional. They are. You see them as a person with knowledge. They hopefully have. And so you're like, oh, something's wrong with me. In my second pregnancy loss, my obstetrician said to me, well, at least you weren't that pregnant. Knowing that we had been trying for a couple of years, that I'd already had a first pregnancy loss, I fired her. First of all, you can also advocate for yourself and ask for another provider in the same office, or you can fully in the same office. I fired her. I was like, so we're done here. If people are saying something to you like that, that's not about you. That's about them or their lack of knowledge or compassion or whatever that might be.
I think it's so important. It actually brought up so much for me, and I'm happy that you shared it because, first of all, I think it's gotten better, but I don't think that we talk enough about struggling with fertility or struggling
very much
with anything surrounding fertility, right? And motherhood. And I miscarried as well around 11 weeks. Thankfully, that was my only pregnancy loss that I ever experienced. But I went in for like my first sonogram, all excited, right? Like we're pregnant and we're doing this. And we heard the heartbeat. And the doctor said to me at that point, she was like, well, this is great news because there's only a 3% chance of miscarrying once you can hear a heartbeat on a sonogram. But she like went and got someone else during this time and like had someone else look at the baby too, the fetus, and things just seemed off, right? Well, the next day I miscarried and I called her because I was experiencing cramping and bleeding and all of these things. And she was just like, oh yeah, I thought you were measuring really small yesterday. You're just miscarrying. And I'm like, you know that from like just being on the phone with me? After yesterday, you told me that there was only a 3% chance of me now miscarrying because you could find a heartbeat. Like wild to me, wild. Needless to say. And she didn't even want me to come in. She was just like, just stay home. You're miscarrying. No big deal.
Yeah.
Like,
I literally, with my second one, no one would answer the phone. And so I drove my happy butt over to that doctor's office and I sobbed. And I asked, I was like, could I maybe like go and sit in one of the powder rooms or well, we don't have any open rooms. So literally I sat in the waiting room sobbing hysterically because, oh my gosh, it's happening again. And I think somebody did finally at least bring me a box of tissues. But I don't use miscarriage because you did not miscarry anything. And especially given what just happened this week, I don't know when this podcast is coming up, but recently in the United States and Alabama.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that we understand, and the fact that people are trying to legislate and prosecute people who experience pregnancy loss, that we're really intentional about. It is a pregnancy loss. You did not miscarry anything. Like a miscarriage of justice is something like an attorney stepped outside of the code of ethics or the letter of the law, which there's ambiguity and grayness in the law too. But
yeah,
I just want to say that for everyone who's listening, and maybe if that, maybe I'm giving you therapy right now.
Yeah,
maybe that could also be something that's meaningful for you as well, because like I believe that you did not miscarry anything. And so pregnancy loss, and that's the other thing too, like even obstetricians these days will say miscarry, like, oh, you're miscarrying, stay home. And it's like, I am not doing anything. This is happening. So anyway, I apologize for the tangent, but that's like a big soapbox for me.
I think that's so important. And the crazy thing is that I feel like we don't hear that often. I mean, I have absolutely used the term, but I feel like miscarriage is so commonly used.
Yes.
So
because that is what, and I again, very rarely is any one thing all one thing. I need that tattooed across my forehead because I say it all the time. We talked about this before we started recording. It's so hard to operate in nuance in this world these days. You are either with me or you are against me. You are the right or you are wrong. You are either, we're always right. You're not allowed to ask questions and you have to stay exactly where you were, even though you've gotten new information, because how dare you flip flop? And I very strongly disagree with that. You and I both were on the same page about that. And so I'm sure when somebody decided that that was the word that they used, then maybe perhaps there wasn't malintent, or perhaps there was, because women have never been really respected and that's all we were good for. And how dare you miscarry this baby? I don't know. I don't know the origin of the word. But I do think I know it's really important for us to be intentional about those things. And again, because especially in the United States, there's so much blame placed on, there's so much stigma around, like we now in Alabama can't even participate in IVF. I think it was in Ohio that was trying to prosecute people, and their Supreme Court took a couple of days to determine whether or not they were actually going to arrest this poor human, this birthing person who is experiencing a pregnancy loss. While this person is experiencing a pregnancy loss, they're also worrying about litigation. Like,
I can't even fathom.
So that for me, I think if you're already on this podcast, you're probably already with us. And some of you are like, yes, Meg, please move on and get to the point. But it's not. Another example of that is I was talking about echo words. I teach at the University of Kansas. I said, I don't use that word because you didn't miscarry anything. And one of my students started sobbing. She was like, I was like, you okay? And she's like, I have had pregnancy losses and no one has ever said that to me. And you just like reframed my entire experience. Like, it's not my fault. We blame ourselves. We do. How my body is terrible. And
I can't even tell you. Like, when I finally, like, sorry, we're taking this on a tangent, but that's okay, because I think it's important, especially given the circumstances and of what's going on in the world, or what's going on in America, I should say. But yeah, I ended up having to go to the emergency room that night. So it wasn't just a stay home and we'll figure it out at another time.
Yes.
I got so sick. My blood pressure dropped so low that I passed out on the bathroom floor. My husband had to call an ambulance. So you were just so overwhelmed with sadness and pain, like physical, horrible pain. And then on top of that, to feel as though there could have been something that you could do differently, because that's a messed up thing that is put in your mind. I don't know if it's societally or personally or a mixture of both. I can remember sitting in the office like 2 days later, just hysterically crying, like, what if I ate something different? Or what if I did this? Or what if I did? And I was like a perfectly healthy individual who did nothing wrong. And even if I wasn't a quote unquote perfect, healthy individual who did nothing quote unquote wrong, you still do not have control over pregnancy loss.
Yes. And we know that 1 in 4 people experience pregnancy loss. I can't remember now. I think it used to be 1 in 8. Now it's 1 in 6, or it might be the other way around. And I apologize. I am not the numbers person, but I will always reference, and I will acknowledge when I don't know the exact number, but so many people experience fertility struggles. And that's the other thing too, is that I do encourage people, when they feel empowered about like firing your obstetrician or whatever that might look like for you, like trusting your body. Like, you knew something was wrong. And even though that medical provider blew you off, that's my word, something was not okay. And so for you to be like, okay, well, if you're not going to treat me, then I will go to the emergency department, and that's fine. But like, really encouraging people. And you know what? That's another, gosh, I'm full of the language today, another fuck politeness moment, because and I'm not saying like everyone go run to your emergency department. My very darling, beautiful sister-in-law it works in the emergency department, and she's such a badass. So like, don't overrun the emergency department. Try to go to your primary providers first. But at the end of the day, if you're being blown off, absolutely go get medical help. Trust your body. Something feels wrong. Worst case scenario, you get there and they're like, yeah, honey, you just haven't eaten enough to, don't say honey. That's patronizing. Yes, Caitlin, you haven't eaten enough today, and that's why your blood sugar is dropping, and that's why you feel like you're going to pass out. So we just need to get you some apple juice. Fine, but better safe than sorry. I am on a soapbox today.
You are, and I am here for it. I'm so excited. It actually leads me into my next question is, well, actually, you know what, Meg, I don't think we've fully answered why perinatal is so important to you. Like, what inspired you?
That, of course, was the biggest thing, my own personal experiences. And I wanted to be the person that I needed when I was going through that. And then, of course, you know, it's evolved since I've been in there. More and more things, more and more of these conversations have continued to come up. One of the big things that I talk about right now with clients is like parenting guilt. And again, here I go with my language, not mom guilt, not default caregiver guilt, but parenting guilt. And understanding and differentiating that has been such a big thing for people. So mom guilt is I didn't make the perfect 100-day shirt because I had a work event, or I didn't cut smiley faces into my kids' Uncrustable, or what. And it's more than that. It is more than, I'm not trying to be flip, but like that Pinterest mom of it all.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Because we live in this world of social media and constant seeing a highlight reel. Yeah.
It's why we could go on a tangent, but I think we've made the point there. I'm tangential today. I will use an example for myself because I never hold myself out to be the perfect human, parent, therapist, woman, anything. The example of parenting guilt is like the same thing with like good anxiety, of like using it to improve your performance or how you are acting in your most authentic way. So one day, 6 months ago, probably now at this point, my daughter would not get into her car seat. And my husband was traveling for work, as he is wont to do. And I was by myself, and I really wanted to like get a workout in, or maybe I needed to wash my hair that day, or so, you know, or maybe I had a doctor's appointment. I can't even remember, but I just like really needed her to get in the car. And this was the day that she really chose to be the three-nager of a 2-year-old that she has always been since she was about 18 months old. Bless her. Love you. And I kind of I didn't like get in her face, but like I leaned in and I really raised my voice. And that is parenting guilt for me. That is me reflecting back on my behavior as a parent and not wanting to make that choice again. And I've really intentionally thought, I've shared this story a number of times, and I've really intentionally thought about like, okay, next time I'm going to take a lap around the car because it's going to take me 30 seconds to walk away. And if I'm going to be 30 seconds late, I'd rather do that than scream in my 2-year-old's face. And my 4-year-old watched me do it.
Yep.
So that's the difference between like parenting guilt and the mom guilt. And I really want to make sure that we're intentional about using those words, because the default caregiver has so much put upon them: emotional, intellectual labor, the family planning, everything. And so that's another thing that I'm really passionate about, is making sure that we're trying to find ways to give ourselves grace, using not toxic positivity, but really being intentional about like, I'm human, I'm not perfect. It's okay to get tired. It's okay to need a break. It's okay to get frustrated. It's okay to articulate all of those things to your kids in a meaningful way so that they can see that they don't have to be perfect, and to see an adaptive way to deal with when you're feeling dysregulated. Here's how I regulate myself. And obviously translating that to something more age appropriate. So those are some of the things that have been really a passion of mine, both getting into it as a default caregiver myself, having my fertility struggles, and then really getting into it as my kids get older and meeting with more and more clients.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I feel like I was listening to myself again, because there's also all of this stress surrounding parenting nowadays because of social media too, and like doing it the quote unquote right way. You know what I mean? I feel as though, I mean, there are so many things that Kevin and I, my partner and I, want to do with our daughter that we didn't have growing up, right? And we've made such great strides. But this notion of like perfection surrounding that, surrounding the modeling of, okay, mommy is a little upset right now, so I'm going to take a deep breath. You're still going to mess up sometimes. And it's that like giving yourself the grace piece that I think is hard for me, and probably a lot of other parents out there. There was another thing that you touched upon that I think is huge, and I'm curious what your perspective is on this. I'm so fortunate in that my partner and I are partners in life and partners in business. And what that means is that we literally have a 50-50 split for what we do for Kind Cotton and what we do for our daughter, because we have the same job. You know what I mean? There's no like, well, Dada is working 3 jobs. He's outside of the house, so mom is doing all of the things with the kids, even if he has a job too. And there's no like, we make the same money. We participate the same. But I would imagine that women over the years have just incurred a lot more responsibility all around.
Historically, first of all, too, we grew up in a space where our parents grew up in a space where their parents grew up in a space and got married. And because like, even I talk about like United States architecture reflects the patriarchy. There's the P word. Because a lot of houses from like the 50s only have 1-car garage because only one person went to work and the mom was expected to stay home, because of course we had heteronormative lifestyles where it was almost always a man and a woman. And anyway, we could go off on that tangent, but I won't. But y'all know how I feel about that. So So yeah, it really is that. And that's why the term mom guilt, like let's erase that hashtag. Let's erase that energy. Parenting guilt. Did you scream at your 2-year-old because she wouldn't listen to you and get in the car? Well, use that guilt versus shame. I'm not a bad person, but I made a choice that is not within my energy. And being able to say that in a different way and framing that helps me to not be as hard on myself because I'm not perfect.
Well, I actually want to know, to follow up on what you just said,
Mm-hmm.
because this is something somehow we cover all the time, but I feel like particularly in our country, and you and I spoke about this a little bit beforehand too, is that we're not actually embracing children for being the beautiful human beings that they are, right? And especially historically speaking, well, you need to listen and you need to cut it out because I said so and I am the boss and these are the rules.
Right.
When in reality, it was such a beautiful teaching moment for you to say, I'm sorry, mom can mess up too, right?
Yes.
And I owe you an apology, because children shouldn't be made to fear you in order to listen to you. So I'm wondering if you could talk about some experience you may have had with that with some of your clients, or just in general, what your thoughts are about that.
It's so hard because there is that. And I actually had this conversation with my daughter's teacher at her last school, where it was like, I really don't want them to be afraid of me. I don't want them to be, I'm not going to be their friend. You know, when they're like 25, absolutely. Let's go on a nice little holiday together in wine country. Yes, please. But like, especially right now, they need to understand boundaries, and children do their best in boundaries. And also I want to just snuggle their little faces. They're so cute. And he's just, of course you can have a third applesauce packet. And like, yes, of course. And also sometimes I'm tired and I want to put on an extra episode of Bluey and like all of that. But I was like, what is the language? What is the difference? Like, to get them to respect you without getting them to fear you. I don't know the answer. It's very individualized for everybody and what you want as a parent. But I do feel that of like, how do I get my kids to respect me? I don't want to say respect my authority, but like, what do we want? How do we want to say that? Not like I'm an authority figure, but I am the person who makes the rules and sets the boundaries because I'm the person who's in charge of keeping them safe and healthy. And that's hard to articulate to a 4-year-old or whatever, insert age here. But yeah, so that honestly has been an ongoing conversation for me and some of my fellow parents recently, because it really is like, it's a tough thing. And I don't want it to default into fear where they like flinch when they're around me, or where that evolves into the fear of, oh my gosh, if my mom finds out I'm going to die when they get older, she's going to kill me. Versus I want them to be like, oh my gosh, I just made a terrible mistake. I got to call my mom. Yeah. That's the other thing we talk about with judgment too. I'm speaking to myself, and I have this conversation with clients a lot as well about like, so first of all, my son was 8 months old when we first left Houston, which was March 17th of 2020, and entered quarantine simultaneously in a city that we knew literally nobody. So, and I was a stay-at-home parent for 4 months. And so even then I wasn't even like going to work and meeting friends. And even if I had it, so we never went places really. And we took quarantine pretty seriously. And so even if we did go out, it was like on a patio where there were only like 2 tables, but it was originally had 20 tables, like. Yeah. And so and then I had my daughter in 2021, and like right before Delta came around. And so we had a little bit of flexibility, but when she was an newborn, and my kids just like don't really know how to behave in public or with another. Certainly they were going to school, so they understood like some more with other kids, but like, and that for me was a pressure that I was putting on myself a lot of like, look at that kid just sitting so calmly and eating and like chuckling and whatever. My kids are running around, climbing up the banisters, and like, it's tough because they're 2 and 4 or younger even. And I want them to be their beautiful, wild, expressive selves. And I also feel I allow myself, and I'm being intentional about that, to feel humiliated. Like that's a reflection on me as a parent. And ultimately it's not. They're their own humans. We do have rules. We do have boundaries. It is my job to redirect them when they are being unsafe or disrespectful, certainly. But I don't know. It's hard to give yourself that grace, but really encouraging people, and I'm saying it to myself, that your children's behavior, generally speaking, is not a reflection of you as a parent. Now, if you're punching people in the face and they're punching people in the face,
Yeah, exactly.
let's have a conversation about that. But
yeah.
generally
No,
speaking,
I get that. I think we put too much on ourselves, and a lot of it is
yes,
inherently who they are.
yes,
So,
yeah,
which can be a beautiful thing, right? This is something that our listeners have heard a ton, but I was so grateful as a girl, and you'll understand why I'm saying this,
yes,
to have my parents continually support who I was, because I was loud and I was passionate and I was what some
amen.
people would say argumentative, but they looked at it as I had a lot to say and I was curious
Mhm,
and I was going to do amazing things in the world and I was going to use this voice
mhm.
for good. And
Yes,
had they not instilled all of that in me, it probably would have made me feel horrible about who I was.
you are wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. There is something to be, like, ashamed of for
Uh-huh.
being that way. Girls should not be that way, and, of course, I got that from outside sources, but my parents were the people who mattered most to me, and they always instilled this sense of, "You are unique, and you are who you are, and you're gonna do amazing things because of
Mhm,
who you are," and I
mhm,
think that's really important. Of
mhm.
course, all falling within that, are you being respectful? Are you, like, you know, not being totally off the rails?
Right,
And I was most of the time.
right.
Um,
I just really celebrate the parents who are trying to allow their kids to do that. And I think that is a lot of our goals. And I also hold all of the space for those of us who are like, but my kids are the only ones running around screaming and throwing things and blah 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 blah. So it's also tough there.
yeah. Has the mental health of caregivers shifted, particularly over the past 4 years, let's say since the pandemic? Because I think many, many, many times we talk about the kids, rightfully so. But being in the line of work that you are in, like, I
Mhm.
know I had my daughter 3 months prior to the pandemic, so very
Mhm.
similar
Yes,
to you. We took
yes.
it very, 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 very seriously, and we were living in the state of Florida, and we felt like we were crazy for taking it seriously in the
They
state of
felt
Florida.
they tried to make you feel like you were the one who had lost the plot. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was wild. So, I didn't have any of the new mom supports,
Yeah.
right? So, I'm curious from a professional what you have seen in your line of work when it comes to mental health over the past few years.
So much. It's been really interesting, especially with that isolation, especially feeling like luckily on it's very much a double-edged conversation of there's too much on the internet. There are too many people espousing that they know what is right and what is wrong. There are too many people showing only a highlight reel that then if we internalize that and participate in obsessive comparison disorder, we are going to struggle. And then also it was nice at like 3 o'clock in the morning if I can Google something and be like, oh, okay, this is not the end of the world. This is just like, oh, this loose stool means this.
Yeah.
And I will call the doctor in the morning, but I don't need to go to the emergency department. Like those, so it's very yes. And for me, I was very lucky. I mean, we had a group of girlfriends and all 5 of us had kids May, July, September, December. And so and 2 of those had older kids. I think they were 3 at the time our kids were born. So like I was really lucky to be able to virtually
Yeah.
have some of those conversations. I do think it got a little toxic because when we would get frustrated with things, because we were all frustrated and not learning how to like cohabitate 24/7 with people. So any little thing that one of our partners did, we would start to like text about, and I would recognize like some of the unhealthy traits and habits of that. And so I encourage people of like, how you are intentional about dealing with those conversations with partners and being open and communicating and also giving each other grace as we're trying to learn to give ourselves grace. It's easier to give other people grace sometimes, but it's also difficult to give your partner grace.
Mhm.
There are a number of things about being intentional about like the fair play method or whatever kind of energy that you want to make sure that you're sharing the emotional and mental load where you were talking about like you all have that 50-50 split. But even in
Mhm.
those moments where like, but you're sick. So you've only got 20 minutes,
Yeah.
20% to give, and your husband's got to pick up that 80%, but you all are being intentional about maybe not necessarily articulating numerically or do what that looks like, or you're both sick. And so you've both got 20%. So how do we make up that other 60%, and what does that look like? And making sure, I mean, it really boils down to communication. There have been the advent of more social media support groups, which has been really lovely. And people do feel more seen, especially like I had somebody on my show recently who's a solo parent. And like she has some of the closest friends that she has are virtual, but they're also solo parents. And so they're able to relate and give ideas. And then also too, again, we'll go back to the comparison, which is also, and there's some toxicity in that as well. So it's very much, yes, and I think just the self-awareness piece of like, what are the things that you are doing that are adaptive? What are the things that you are doing that are reactions versus responses? How are you building communication patterns with your partner if you have one, your co-parent, whatever that looks like, to be able to help ourselves? Because yeah, I mean, I really don't think that we're over the pandemic of it all. I think a number of us picked up daily drinking habits because where else are we going? So why not have a split a bottle of wine on a Tuesday night, which I'm not judging, like you do you. And if you think you have problems, please seek help. But the picking up of the phone, I think, has been something that has been tough for a lot of people, where I will recognize, like, for some reason during bedtime is when I think I need to start working on Canva to fix my Parkinson's ride. This was literally me last night. Like, I'm doing the Parkinson's Foundation ride on Saturday, which will have already passed by the time this posts. And like, for some reason, that was when I felt like I needed to work on my flyer for it and try to post and get more people to join me during bedtime when I was going to have a couple hours right after.
Yeah, that was my whole morning.
Right?
Or it is. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like my daily life, because you feel just like there's so many more things to do, you know? So I have to be so intentional around leaving my phone outside of the room as much as possible when I'm with my daughter, because then there's not that pull to, you know, not be present. And do I have to do it sometimes? Am I guilty of the bad?
Right.
You know, of course I do. Of course I do. No one is perfect. And then that goes back to like giving yourself grace.
Technology is not probably going anywhere. And so being mindful about your technology practices, like, you don't owe your 4-year-old necessarily an explanation, but also saying like, hey, I need to take this call because blah, blah, blah. So would you mind just going and playing over there for a minute? And I'm going to, or like, I need to send this email, versus like, mommy, get off your phone. Like, why are you always on your phone? My son said that to me once, and I don't believe that I'm always on it, but I definitely am on it more than I'd like to around them. And that just crushed me.
I get it.
And so being, again, intentional and modeling those things of like, it's okay to be on your phone sometimes. How are we respecting each other in this space of like, I'm meant to be in this space intentionally with you, versus I know at 7 o'clock I need to send this email or check in on something or make this call. So it's all, I mean, intentional really is the word of the day as well, the self-awareness piece. And I like what you're saying too. I actually had this conversation about technology. Vaping is another big one. Like, can you move that away so that you have to be conscious in picking it up?
It makes such a difference for me. Like, if it's in my pocket, I'm like, who can I answer on DM? What can I post? What can I, it's constant. But if it's all the way in another room and my daughter and I are engaged in play and I have to actually like physically get up and be like, Mama will be right back, I'm way less likely to participate in it. And it makes you like happier all around, because honestly, I don't want to be on my phone all day long. Like, I can be more productive if I lay out the time in which I'm on my phone, you know? So intention,
activity planning, like, it is really helpful. And yeah, and that also goes to when I am constantly talking about focus and distractibility, is if you are setting yourself up for success in that way as well, you're helping to retrain your brain. Like, I was talking to somebody on my show, and then she was like, my son made fun of me. He was like, wow, Mom, you can't even sit through a red light and not pick up your phone. And she was like, yeah, hi.
It's me.
And since then, I don't necessarily think that I did it every single time, but I want to do it less and less and fewer times than I'm doing it now. And that was something too, where it was like that constant need to be connected, because we were so isolated for so long, and it was so helpful. And now that we are able to access things more in person, or at least like less restricted, that how do we shut that down? And it really is like retraining your brain on that, which is why I was saying, like, even just being more aware of how often you have that urge to pick up your phone before you even think about that. This is something I say all the time to clients, like the awareness piece. And then we think about thinking about making a change. We don't make any changes because if we're expecting perfection overnight, first of all, haha, or ever, haha. But also, this is my mantra for 2024, if it were easy, you'd already be doing it. If it were easy to never pick up your phone, unless you were really intentionally going to post one thing on Instagram, or you like really wanted to make sure that you saw Beyonce's new album drop, like, and God bless, do that, then fine. But it's not easy. So the first thing is being aware that you're doing it. Like, oh, I just went to reach for my phone, but it wasn't around me, so I didn't. Or still go ahead and pick it up, but then think about maybe in the future what that might look like for you if you weren't to do that. And thinking about, like you said, even scheduling out some of that time. So we have the piece of awareness. We think about thinking about making that change. And then we start slowly, incrementally making some of those changes. So you start to feel little successes. You recognize some of the hiccups. It's not a linear trajectory, but starting to be able to feel a little better about it. And then getting closer to the point where you'd like to be.
Yeah, I love that. It's so important, particularly for an ADHD brain. I feel like that's super important. Before we go, I want to know two things. First, where can people follow you, support you? Tell us all the socials and all the good stuff.
Yes. So I'm Amplify Wellness with Meg on Instagram. Meg Duke. I mean, you can find everything there. That, like, if everyone's like that, if you go one place, go there. But you can find I'm at megdukelcsw.com, where you can find, if you don't mind me doing a little plug, I have actually Distraction Buster courses. I have a little freebie, so like go there, check that out. I have a free daily mood tracker if that's something. I think that's really important too. Quick little tangent of like understanding, like, are there any patterns to the stressors that you're experiencing? What was going on when you were experiencing that stressor? Like when you did that maladaptive thing. Like my favorite coping skill is a bacon cheeseburger. It's not a healthy coping skill, but it helps me, right? And so, like, what led up to what was happening, what was going on when I got that urge to get the bacon cheeseburger, or when I actually got it, because sometimes I do. So just those sort of things. Then I have also some paid courses too, that, like, the Distraction Buster that goes on. I also have a Facebook group for the Distraction Buster Challenge, all of that kind of stuff. And then the Perinatal Podcast, of course, which you'll be able to find Caitlin on. Hopefully by the time this drops. So that'll be really fun as well. And all of that's on my Instagram.
Awesome. And Meg, before you go, this wouldn't be the Kindnesses Pod if I did not ask you what true kindness means to you. So can you share with us what your definition of kindness is?
I'm going to give you one word answer, but then I'm going to go on. Kindness is clarity. There's a difference between kind and nice. Nice is doing something for somebody even though you are overworked or you don't want to do it, but you know that, like, oh, okay, well, I'll be nice and I'll do that anyway. And then you, in some level, build resentment for that, or you have sacrificed something else in your own way. That's nice. And that's not kind. Kind is setting people up for success with your expectations, with your boundaries, understanding that sometimes you will disappoint people, especially when you have to protect your mental well-being, physical well-being, your family. Like, that's your job, is to do that. So if you were supposed to go somewhere and everyone's just not feeling it, and you say, we're not going to make it, then being able to let the person know clearly, and then not taking on that guilt of, like, this is just what we need to do. So the more that we can set people up for success with expressing our needs and desires and communication, the kinder we are. So for me, kindness is clarity.
Something that I need to listen to over. I'm just going to hit play at the end of this podcast over and over again for weeks until I have that aspect of kindness down, because, and I know this is probably going to be, people already know this at this point, but I'm assuming this will be a 2-part podcast, which I am excited about because we've talked about some amazing things. But for me, that is the piece I struggle with, right? My therapist actually said to me, first session I ever saw her, was, you have zero issues advocating for other people.
There it
being
is.
kind to other people. Why can you not advocate for yourself?
There it is.
Thank you so much for being here, Meg. I really appreciate you in this space and in the larger space as well.
It's my pleasure. I'm so delighted, and I'm excited for your listeners to get to hear our conversation and our conversation on my show. So thanks for that.
Me too. Tune into that too. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Kindness Is podcast. If you love it and it's adding even a little bit of value to your life, we would love, love, love if you could subscribe, rate, and review so we can reach even more people and make this world a little bit more kind.